we're going to start with a warm-up exercise, and this may look familiar to some of you. Believe it or not, I want you to have I have regular just sketching drawing paper. I'm going to use a 4B pencil. It's nice and sharp, reminding you how to use the proper drawing grip. So not this one. Remember, this one's for writing. You want to draw. To draw, index, middle finger, thumb. And any variation of this, as long as you have control over the pressure and the range of motion. That's what we want here. So this may be frustrating if you've never done it before, but what I want to do is I'm going to draw 5 figures on this page. Maybe I'll do 2 and then switch. So I have several sheets of paper here, drawing paper. And what we're going to do is this. I'm going to do one very quick recap about last week. So what am I looking for? And you could go ahead and draw this if you want. I'm just going to go through the explanation. We're going to look through one of 2 things. So this one, I'm going to look for the proportion. So I'm looking just at the general shape, basic shape of what is this, the head. And I'm going to look for the general shape and axis of what would be my torso, hip bone, and then the major joints. So notice the angle here. This one's lower. I could actually draw the line to the next major joint, the elbow. And then I could begin to do some of these gestural lines. These are not supposed to be, they're not intended to be stick figures, okay, with little circles like that. We want gesture, but here's the key. I want some, if I need the hip bone and I need the line, I'm going through the outside towards the knee, line up my knees, which one's higher, and then some of the curves. And we can do one of 2 things. So remember, we're looking for the major joints, the proportions, and just a quick gesture. And you can begin to see how this, obviously a little neater, could become a nice setup foundation for your drawing. Not this. Even if you only get through an area, let's say of torso, head, torso, and hip, okay? It's better than actually going all the way further than you need to. Because here's the kicker. We're going to use a 30-second clock. So what are we going to do? I'm just going to flip this over, and I'm going to start the clock. So we have 30 seconds. And here's the thing. I really want you to think about this. So let's not start yet. I'm just going to take that off for a second. This is an exercise in observation. Your eyes should be on the image, and I'm going to be switching the images every 30 seconds. So just so you know, we're going to do 5 30-second images, and then we're going to do them again, and I'm going to double the time. So what are you looking for? You're looking for the things you need to see in the most essential, basic way, and also loosening up. So this is a warm-up. So you can actually get more familiar with how you're handling the line. Today, as we know, from one day to the next, it could always be a little different. So here's number 1. When I start the clock, it could take you 5-10 seconds to actually look before you begin drawing. Usually it takes 2, 3, 5 seconds. And let's go ahead and start it. Here's our first one. So I'm going to try to draw 2 here. I could also do this horizontally so they feel a little bit better. I'm not trying to rush. The key is the longer you can gesture these lines, and notice that I'm deciding to go in, which way am I deciding to go? Which way do I see it easier? Now, you may not be able to see what I'm doing if you're focused on yours, but I'll give you a couple of seconds afterwards. Did 30 seconds go by already? It did. Let me reset the clock. So notice how far I got. But I could begin to see, do I have enough information to go to stage 2 of this drawing? That would be That's what I'm looking for. And never forget, it's also about just loosening up, warming up, having fun. Okay, so let's go to number 2. There's number 2. Also looks familiar. And start the clock. So if you take your eyes away from your subject and you look at your paper, you're wasting that valuable, you feel the need, there's that language issue that I was talking about earlier, to actually understand what it is we're doing here. There it is, 30 seconds. So what is it that I'm looking for? I'm looking for those essential shapes, basic positions, some of the relationships, right? And basically sculpting out the figure from basic shapes, basic lines. Let's go to number 3. These are supposed to go a little bit smoother and start the clock. So here we go. Going a little bit faster, a little bit smoother. If you get to the point where you can actually draw these lines, these gestures, that's what we're actually working with today. Oh gosh, I did the wrong one. Anyways, we'll do I guess we'll do 6. I went backwards. And there's the clock. Move to the next one. It's actually this one. So here we go, a bonus. Starting the clock. What do I see differently here? I always start with the head. Is it something I can maybe analyze and realize that there's a better option if I see it maybe in a different way? So what I want to see in the end is how you saw the lines, the shapes. Oh, well, this one's looking kind of like a stick figure. But what I'm trying to point out is if I have the relationships and they're just gestured in, and it is not exactly a circle, another circle for the shoulder, another for the elbow. No, these eventually become maybe semicircles, or I call them SC shapes for a reason, that just hint at the overall basic shape, basic gesturing of the figure. Let's reset the clock and I'm gonna have to go to a new sheet of paper. And we're gonna do 2 more here. So this is 30 seconds. There we go. Now another thing you're gonna notice is time. So the flow of line and how you manage your pace. There we go. Capturing a gesture is one of the most important things you absolutely have to exercise and practice and study when dealing, especially with the figure. Last one. 30 seconds, and here we go. Same page. Remember, the grip, super important. Can I play with it? Can I practice variations of the grip? Yeah. This is all about being creative, about experimenting. Ooh, we have a nice shifting, and you almost wish you had more time to deal with the curvature and the tilt and twist that's going on in that torso. And there we are. But generally, here's the idea. If I'm going to click all of these off, and I were to ask you, going all the way at the beginning, and I go back, oh yeah, I recognize that one, and I know which one that is. I could have done a little bit better. Definitely could tell everything that's going on in this pose, and I could almost finish it because of the information that was captured here. It's not just recognizing the pose. It'll get to the point where we'll recognize the person or the subject, and that's where we want to go. Okay, I'm going to flip this page over, and guess what? We are going to double the time. Yes, double the time. So we're going to go to 1 minute sketches. Now, I hope you're doing at least 3 per page. 2 is great, better. 1, of course, that's how I would highly, highly recommend in your sketchbook, in your sketching pad, to actually use the full range, full size. If you're doing smaller ones, you're kind of limiting the gesture. So if you can, use that sketchbook, use the full page, try to make it at least 2 per page. So we have 1 minute on the clock, and we're doing the exact same thing. So there's no reason to slow down. Let me go ahead and start the clock. And here we are. So your grip, super important. Do I grab it shorter, longer? I'm going to grab it way longer, all the way at the end of the pencil here. And at some point, I want to be able to draw this without taking my eyes off of my subject. Meaning, what do I mean? I mean, you are 100%, and not even blinking sometimes, looking at your subject, at the actual line, shape, missing a little bit of curvature here, but really becoming familiar, understanding that what this is a true exercise in observation. So a little more information than the first time. So if I were to compare first version here, 30 seconds to the second, much more information. Maybe I could do even a little bit looser. So that word looseness, it really comes from how close you are observing, how you choose to see what's there. Let's go to number 2. Minute started. And here we are. So depending on how much information you choose to put in every line, depending on what we usually call detail, it's how am I able to see more information that is absolutely basic and essential to the overall. So it has to deal with angle. It definitely deals with angles. It begins to deal with those joints, structure, bone structure, muscle structures. You want to actually see beyond. So a little bit of the foundation, beyond the angles and the lines, a little bit of the shape that is under. So that means the tilt, twists, and the time's up. And all the varieties of interesting things that only you are going to see the way you see things. And that's the beauty. When we see these, it's going to be amazing. So saving all of these at the end. Oh, one last thing. Before I forget, and I should have said that at the beginning. Take a break 1 second here. I'm going to go back to my first page and mark these as 30 seconds. So I know that all of these were 30 seconds. These were also 30. Well, this was the demo, actually. And here I have 1 minute. So I want to label them because, believe it or not, we lose track. So here comes the next 2. There it is. Reset the clock and start. 1 minute. I'm going to make this one full page. See how we begin to really loosen up our grip, begin to see the tilt, the angle. Even beyond that, we would see the weight of the figure. We begin to get a true understanding of what proportion means. But overall, it's understanding what it's all about. It's about lines. It's about lines creating shapes and understanding that those shapes always go back to the definition of the line, and the line is what you decide, how you decide to see it. The shape of your line, the expression of your line goes down to the pace, the angle, the length, the direction. There we go. Almost. Perfect. And it really becomes more and more creative, more and more expressive. Let's go ahead and label that 1 minute. Turn it over and go to the next one. Reset the clock and start. At some point, you stop thinking. You're really in the zone, seeing it all, seeing all the connections, seeing all the things beyond line, which I was talking about, directions and beyond the pose and the weight. You begin to add character and expression, uniqueness. And it becomes absolutely intuitive. I'm making these lines, if for those of you who remember last week, we did studies that were straight line studies. So you could do that as well. It doesn't have to go right to SC shapes. It could be a little more straight lines, just like you see them there. And we'll label this, again, 1 minute. Moving along, the idea also is to create kind of a flow to these exercises. The way you would actually do this in a live model session, the model just changes pose every 30 seconds. And you do about 20 of them. And then it goes to a minute. And the pose changes automatically every minute. And you do about 10 of them. And then it goes to 2 minutes. And then 5 minutes. And each time is less. Double the time. And you enter that amazing, it is amazing, that place where you translate there's that language issue. Me trying to deal with lines and space, sometimes negative space. I've been a little bit, just a little bit, could have been a little bit looser in all of these examples. 1 minute. And that was our final here. Okay. Going back, and we're going to skip the first and the second. We're going to go to the third because last week we did number 1 and number 2, which were these two, if you remember. And we spent quite a bit of time with them. You can go back, rewatch the video if you want. We're going to number 3, which is this one. And we are going to do our first. Switch the clock here to 5 minute. So this is going to be a 5 minute. And I want you to make a decision looking back at what worked for you. I'm going to go ahead and start the clock. So this is a 5 minute. Don't forget to make sure you have a sharp pencil, sharp tool. You could also be doing this, obviously, pencil, charcoal, and I will be switching over just to demo that as well, where we went to straight lines. And if you recall, we looked at basic lines and the angle of those lines. And before we went to joints or, well, I'll explain in a little while as well, the bean shape in the body. Begin to use more of a straight line, maybe Add a little bit of creativity to the line. The idea as well is relationships, how you begin to see the lining up of, for example, shoulder over the edge, across or inside. No curvatures yet. As you begin to read into proportion, where we have angles. And again, it's every time it has to do with seeing parts of it and also how you see the whole, meaning the entire thing, as you see smaller parts and the whole all at once in a way. You're simplifying the line and simplifying what you're looking for and how you decide to see it. It's actually what this exercise is all about. That tendency to go right into detail, wanting to draw the little hair with the wrong grip, by the way. You want to just, does that information matter in this moment? Remember, we talked about almost like building or sculpting from a block of marble. How do you decide which big chunks? So that's where the straight lines we did last week come in, and how one line then becomes maybe two lines. And then from there, you begin almost without even trying to see the curves in those lines. For example, one line, what used to be one line becomes two, and from two, we could break it into two more. And that's how you develop it. But it's not exactly how I'm doing it now. It's you coming up with your own way and being aware how you're making those decisions. Realizing that there's no need to add complexity. What you want to do is simplify all the way through, all the way to finished. When you use the word, okay, finished, you feel, you have a feeling of, no complexity at all. It remained simple. And the longer you look for that, the longer you can, it's not really looking at it. You do see it. You easily learn to see it. It's sticking to it, the discipline to stick to it, to follow what you know. Stay in your lane, basically, not rushing ahead and having the right thought in your mind. Sometimes no thought at all, just saying what's there, saying the angle, placement, relationship. My gosh, I still have 27 seconds. So this feels like forever now after a 30-second and a 1 minute. And that's also part of it. How you manage your pace is a huge part of your process. Whether you work a little bit faster or slower, at this point, you get to manage your own and really find your own way. There we are. Okay, this one, 5 minute. Much more information than the 1 minute. And so you begin to see, with patience and a nice, good pace. We're going to go ahead and do this one as well. Two of them are going to be 5 minutes. There we go. Started the clock. So I wanted to switch. Off guard here. Second. I'm going to switch over to charcoal. And this is a charcoal pencil. This is a soft charcoal pencil. And this actually begins to add a little bit more dimension to our drawing. And usually these types of studies, you would want to do them with a tool like charcoal, with a medium like charcoal. So here we go. Now, if you have a charcoal stick, a charcoal, a willow, compressed charcoal, or charcoal pencil, testing out how that works for you. Let me start a little bit smaller and a little bit more volumetric this time. So I'm going to go look for I'm thinking my way through it with straight line and volume almost simultaneously. So I'm looking for those relationships and those angles, but at the same time, I'm looking for that general, and notice how I'm kind of ghosting it light because I know I could come back later with a little bit of a heavier line as I work my way through it. No detail. What you want to do here is just build that foundation. Navigate. Really? Sometimes stop. Measure. You can actually stop, breathe, blink, and come up with a thought, come up with a plan, come up with a strategy. Then solution presents itself. No pressure. This is supposed to be relaxing. It's supposed to be very relaxing. I begin to look a little bit at negative space as well. What is negative space, you say? Well, for example, look at this little shape here. It's not a square. There's a bit of triangles. Gives me a little bit of better reading or position. So I'm going to shade it in. This shape that I just drew here, I was just drawing space. And you could actually see one here too. So thus, does it make sense for me to draw this shape, which I see a little simpler and actually with bits of curve, and try to match that? I'm going to shade it in so you can see what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's easier to see it that way. So combination of both. Obviously, I'm going from what I talked about earlier, which was more volumetric, that straight line, and now adding a little bit of negative space. Now I cannot help unseeing some of these shapes. Notice that negative space there, a little bit of negative space here. And just capturing those sometimes much more simplified shapes. Solve the puzzle. So here we are, seeing a couple more. Notice this one down here as well. And usually in the area of feet, hand, or finding these and drawing these shaded shapes, for example, this one down here, you can actually match and see if you're closer. Usually you'll see it much clearer. Notice this one here. And there we go. And we're going to get there. There's our head. Perfect. So label this one. Obviously, we know it's charcoal. but this is also a 5-minute. Wow. Okay, so I hope you're enjoying these. Now, after seeing pencil, charcoal, I think I'm going to stick with charcoal. But I won't be able to flip it over. I'll just keep one per page. And here comes our next. This gets exciting. Switch to clock. As you see me go to, oh, I need to add one here very quickly. 10 minutes. So we're going to do our first 10-minute. Place that up here. So this is going to be a 10-minute. Now you're noticing we doubled the time. We skipped the 2, but we went from 30 seconds to 1 minute to 5 minutes, now 10 minutes. So from here to here, we're now doubling the time. Does that mean we have to double the information? No. What that means maybe is I could double the amount of time to look, to observe, and maybe manage my pace. So here we are, 10 minutes. Following, once again, what are you going to follow here? Are you going to follow the method of, once again, finding volume? This looks very familiar again in some of the findings of lines, how we find, notice I'm taking a little more time, loose, but a little more refined in terms of shaping. I'm also looking at the tilt and the bend of that egg, which is the head shape, in space, seeing it a little more three-dimensional. So I see the bottom. I want to maybe include a little bit of negative space as I see these volumes. I want to add space between these. But you could be going much more expressive, much more creative, much more experimental with some of these lines. So I'm looking for the shoulder, big joints. So here, placing, looking to some of those curves. And the other thing I want to begin to see is how these relate in space. So I'm seeing the curve. Is it coming towards me, away from me? So I want to begin to see and read, not just line, but the curve of that line in space, in three-dimensional space. So as I slowly develop some of these volumes, you notice there's curve, and what I want to develop eventually is weight. So there's a little bit of weight. Is it floaty or is it heavy? And then you realize, well, it's kind of like building blocks. Like I always talk about it, it's like a puzzle. Like, do you look for those pieces of the puzzle? And how do you piece them together? Now, when I go from circle to sphere, what's the difference? It's space. But how do you create the illusion of space? Usually it's perspective, curvature, or light. And I haven't actually done any of it yet, where we could, whether pencil or charcoal, just begin to add some of that bit of light, and that would be interesting as well. But still focused on line. Remember, at every stage, you should be thinking simplicity. Simplified information is what gets you there. No need to make it harder than it is, to add complexity. simplify line through line, being able to see it come together piece by piece. I may have caught a little too much attention down here as I see some of these lines. Notice that I'm beginning to see the angles and the relationships as well. Going back to the major joint, so I go back to the shoulder. Here I'm seeing this beautiful shaping of an elbow, and I know the elbow's there. Where? Well, it's not a major concern. I could break it down into lines. Also a little bit of negative shape here. Negative space, I'm sorry. But you begin to see it come together while still. And I took a little more gentle pace in this one. So here we are. So I have this, and I'm noticing a few things now, and I want to add a little more expression to this torso. That turn and twist and kind of a little bit of that bend back. So some of these lines become just a little bit more important, not important, more expressive maybe. So from straight lines, we can go a little, break them into two, which give us that illusion of curve. And this is the beauty of charcoal. You can just hint at that shifting of volume through darkening just a little bit. And there's that torso, a little more curvature here. Notice my grip. Using this grip is what's going to give you that ultra soft, light pressure, full range of motion, and expressive quality. Simplifying the information, beginning to see more of it, beginning to see more curve. In case I haven't said this today, you haven't heard me say it today, what are you looking at? What are you studying? If this is a study, a sketch, what are you studying? If you're studying that, are you looking at it? Are your eyes on your reference? If not, why not? Where are you getting that information from? So if you're not looking at your reference, if you're looking at your paper, you're making up information. Where do you get the information from? Realizing that how you decide to observe, and are you really observing? How much observing are you doing? Talk about in percentage. Is it 90%, 80%, 50%, or less than that? It should be at 90+%, meaning every line you're drawing, your eyes should be on your subject, not on your paper. When you draw the line, you should be looking at the line you're drawing, meaning the one you're studying, the one you're looking, not the one you're drawing. You glance back at your paper just to check, but it doesn't matter if that line goes off. Yeah, you eventually become more precise, but that's only because you can see it so clearly. And the better you look, the better you learn to observe and become disciplined. And I call that blind drawing, meaning you're looking at your subject, not at your paper. It's one of the biggest, I would call it not mistake, but bad habits that I see. When you're drawing and you have a model right there in front of you, you don't even look at it. You're looking at your paper. for 10 minutes. And it's the opposite way. You're looking at your paper, staring, and then glancing over at your subject for 2 seconds, and then back at your paper. It's the opposite. It should be. The thing, along with your grip, that you should be focusing on the most. And now you notice that I haven't tried. If you think, well, he's doing detail. Nope. My effort was never. All these lines are still construction lines. And actually, I'm going to be honest, they're stiff. I should be doing this looser, even though I know it's a 10-minute. I know I could be doing this a lot looser. So in my observation, as I begin to see, not that you need to, but I just want to clean this up a little bit. There we are. And be able to add that quality, that volume. There it is. Mark it as our second 10-minute. Okay. So this is going to feel like, really? We're going to do that again? Yeah, it's the way it works. I need to go back. Where are you? There you are. Oh, that's what it is. Okay, so I'm going to change the clock. And I'm going to change our subject back to this. And I think this is just a beautiful pose. Just to refresh. And add. I think I should go ahead and just, and I'm thinking 20, yep. We're going to make it a 30-minute clock, which would put us right about time. So it's not only doubling the time, it's tripling it. Now, before I start this one, I want to do a quick little demo. It's actually looking at next week. Just a little bit. I want to show you, if I look at a head, we talked about this last week, and if I have, let's say, the shape of the egg, and it's going about this way, notice there's a little tilt there. What I want to find is, and we don't have those features here, we want to find a line, which is the eye line. Now, is the eye line like this, or is it more like this? Automatically giving us that tilt. And is it right down the middle, or is it actually more like this? So with those two lines, I immediately gave you, yep, look at that. It actually follows the line, and you can actually see the hair here, which eventually brings us to the neck and the turn. And this is called the center line and the eye line. Well, guess what else? If I apply that to, and I'm just going to look at another egg here, which is called my bean. And you'll see that it's a bean shape because it's composed of torso, meaning pretty much think of your rib cage, just about your rib cage, right about there, and the overlap of, in this case, if you see it, there it is. So if I do this, notice that I did two eggs. You eventually come up with, see if you could see through those lines. It's kind of a bean. Do you see that bean there? It's sort of a bean shape here that eventually builds up into that. But this bean right here, it also has a center line. When you begin to see it, it's not like you have to draw it, but if you see it and you can actually capture it, it is the next stage. So sometimes you think of it as center line that goes right down. And you got to think about a little bit of anatomy here. Yeah, your belly button points to it. So I want to show you a quick sample that we just did, which would be this one. Notice the bean here. So I'm going to go to the previous page here. And by comparison, I would show you that that bean, if I did the bean for the head, it would have somewhat of a, I noticed that tilt. It has, we barely see the center line. Actually, we don't see the center line at all. But what we do see is the eye line just coming across. And we're looking at it like this. And then my bean would be for the torso. It's a little bit backwards like this. And for that hip bone, it goes a little bit backwards like this. And I'm exaggerating a little bit. And they overlap a little. So there's my bean. There's the bean shape that we eventually turn into. There's a little bit of a crease there. So if you see that bean shape, where would you put the center line for this one? Notice that you barely see it here, that belly button. So the center line would go kind of disappears right at the edge of the side here. And as it comes up, it turns here, right through the center. So it's giving us that nice turn. And eventually, obviously, you see the other lines that hint at it, which give us that pose. And we would do this obviously a little cleaner, not such heavy lines, but it's just the concept of the next stage of how we find not just the line, not just the shapes, not just the volumes. We begin to see a little bit beyond the volume, the anatomy, the structure of how it's all working together. And that's what generally it's called the bean. So let's go back to the image we're going to be working with, and that's this one here, right? 30 minutes. Actually going to, let's see. I'm going to actually trim it down to 20. So we're going to run out of time. There we are. And we're going to start right away. So 20-minute drawing, double the time, using any of the structuring, any of the methods, any and all. Taking it to a fully 20-minute study. Maybe adding a little bit of what we just saw in terms of the bean. So a little slower pace without losing your feel for that gesture, squinting at your image, simplifying the information. Saying the lines, going back to all of these hints and clues that you can use that are going to help you simplify and figure out, set yourself up for success. So here's my first part. I'm trying to really read. So seeing it through, sometimes you want to actually see what's supposed to be there, which would be that rib cage there, without confusing yourself. adding more information than it's actually needed. And it still reduces itself to lines, lines that become shapes. And there it is. There's my bean. So this is how I would go about it. If I wanted to go a little bit further with this, I would really try to find my center line there, which means the head is turning just a little bit in this direction. And I would also find that eye line, which has a little bit of tilt and it's also facing that direction. So if I wanted to add more features here, you could almost begin to see a face. And I would do the same for the turn and that center line of my bean. And you can actually create somewhat of a visual of volume already with just some of these lines here. From here, I would go into back to simplifying information and just simple gestures. Almost back to straight line. A straight line. Kind of gesture that points little by little. In this case, just at the angle of these lines. I could also jump one step ahead, looking at this negative space shape here and how it has almost this triangular coming to a point right here, which begins to place the elements. There's clues everywhere. Your job is to break them down, play detective, figure them out. And you're also the magician who's coming up with tricks. It's tricks. Tricks, how to break down lines, how to place them to create an illusion. What's the illusion? Oh, it's a figure. And we could actually recognize the pose, the weight, the beyond even to a level where we could connect and even have feelings or create feelings in the viewer, which is amazing. Smaller gestures. Beginning to see a little bit of that curvature to the line, just a little bit of the gesture of it as well. Shaping. Simplifying some of my marks. Notice my grip, I'm grabbing it a little bit shorter, a little more control, but still the same grip. Very, very important to not give up, to actually, your signature, your style, your drawing, long term, what you're looking forward to, what you want. We all want different things, but what you're looking for in your drawing. Most likely, I would bet fastest way to get there, easiest, almost best way as well to get better is using the proper grip. And if you struggle, you just work your way through it and analyze it. And like anything else, once you begin to master it, you see the leaps, you see the jumps of, whoa, true line. It's your signature. It basically is how we'll recognize, and it's how we recognize a Picasso, from a Degas, and they all did academic drawing. We could see, you go to a museum and you recognize a Manet from a Degas and a Van Gogh, and it's because you took that technique, that starting with how you hold the instrument, and then pushed it. And eventually you'll come up with your own as well. But don't just stick to the one you think is, because it's very limiting. Right, here we go. Kind of got caught up here in the upper body, the torso. And that's what the beam does. Really, really pushes the image forward. Gives it that almost finished look. Simplifying your lines. I also always compare it to the way you speak. It's not about your voice, your pitch, your tone, your volume, or the words you choose to use, but also how you say, how fast you say it, how efficient and eloquent. So I call these eloquent lines, trying to make your lines eloquent, and they express the idea. Simple, concise, effective, efficient, which is what makes good public speakers, right? There's emotion, there's energy, all these things translate right into your lines. Also, I haven't mentioned, but posture. Sometimes we're set up and I'm sitting when at this point, maybe I should be standing, and I'm also working at an angle. So I'm not working flat on a table. I'm working at about 30 degree on a board. So all of these things, your posture, notice how that affects the way you deliver the line. So your posture and your grip being absolutely consequential to the quality of the line you can deliver. Going a little bit beyond. I actually got so focused here. My proportion is going to be way off down here. Went a little bit bigger. You can definitely see the benefits of loose. Thinking of that word, gesture. What does it mean? Creative, expressive. Expressing what? To put it simply, your connection to the subject. If the subject is not interesting, and or maybe not, but there always are things like you could really turn this study into, well, just to put it plainly, you could even go all the way to abstract, believe it or not, using this as your inspiration. If it's not the type of subject, or whether you like, let's say, flowers or birds or landscapes, if the figure's not it. But if it is, to really see what it is about the line, the pose, the gestures, and the expressive, it ends up being creative qualities. How can I get even further than that? Just beautiful lines, beautiful shapes, but even more expressive, creative, experimental qualities. My eraser here, clean up some of these lines. And as you can see, using a little bit of charcoal obviously gives us a little different read from the subject, but that's the idea. How much further would I take this? Well, let's see. We still got 7 minutes, and that is a lot of time. That's feels very different from the 30-second one. So there's not a lot of light to play with here, but I may do some, just a little bit. My idea is mostly to bring out the volume more than anything. More of the philosophy of less is more, but I do want to work just a little bit of background into this. Kind of enhancing pose just a little bit more. There we go. Beautiful. A little more that early bean there. Do it. So just taking this, I did take it a little bit further than maybe just stopping at line would be the best way. I'm going to give you a few more minutes. There's still 5 more minutes. I think I could do one more. Let's do one more. While you continue working with that, I want to explore, for those of you who are still working and maybe you did finish, looking back at some of the early ones, just doing experiments with finding figures and setting up. See, sometimes you want to find that egg shape. There it is. In this case, finding that center line and then the eye line. Just playing with seeing that bean and almost just deal with circles in the beginning. You realize, wow, there's a way to see inside, under the form. And I'll go back once the clock hits 0 to show you how just looking at developing the form through the bean, and this is what we'll look at more next week. This is just a hint of where we're going to start and focus next week. There's my bean. Obviously, there's my almost coming together with the pose and center line. A little bit of curve to hint at how it's behaving in space. So that's one. Ooh, how about this one? This is going to be interesting. So I'm going back to some of the poses we did earlier. And I'm going to show you how I would deal with some of these. Trying to see the bean. Finding that circle or the egg shape. Gotta see it first, for sure. Gotta see it first. There's the bean. So if I go just a little bit outside of this form, behave just like this. And then where is that center line? Well, it would be right here. Could not be more obvious. Let me do one last one. Let's see if we got enough time. So this exercise, just looking at finding center line, eye line, the volume, which is usually an egg shape. You pretty much start and end with that there. You can see almost a head coming up. And then figuring out the volume of, let's see this egg shape here. Can I see it? Curvature. And there's my bean. So we have a bean that actually has bends and curves in here. And then finding the center line would be, don't see the belly button, but I could picture it there. And through the middle, just like this. So it pretty much gives away the pose. All right, so there's our time. I want to go back and show you what I did here. So these beans, the bean exercises here would be, so here's one. You see me doing no center line because it's almost a profile, just a tiny bit. And then there's the eye line. And as I look at the torso of the bean, I would see there's a raising of this shoulder here. So finding that element, you see the other one coming down here, but you do see the belly button turning and twisting. Now you see the overlap of the two ovals, or the two eggs, which would be your upper torso, lower torso, the hip, and then that center line, finding it. And easily you could begin to see kind of that, what's called the contrapposto, the weight of the leg, of the hip over the legs, and just coming up with that. The second one was this one. So you see here, the back of the head, there is no center line. There is no eye line. Just, if anything, there's an ear there. That's it. But then it works this way. Through the back, we have the upper and the lower back. And the center line is obvious. It's the backbone. And sometimes we even have lines that just come together and they show themselves in bone or muscle. And then the last one was this one. So here in this drawing, if you look closely, you see the center line. I'm sorry, the eye line, the center line. That's the hand here holding the head. But then as we develop the bean, you can also see the center line if you look closely. There's a couple lines right there. Don't see a belly button, but we can figure out that it goes this way. So you see the stacking of this with weight over this one, creating these bends that will eventually give you the overall pose. And then the connection of the head, torso, obviously there. So those very simple, easy ways to study the foundation, the volumes, and in this case, the beam, not just the line, the shapes, but the volume, the three-dimensional volume through the center line in the beam. Um, Great way to practice. Great way to practice. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next week.